properly. It's my pleasure to welcome Udai Kanukolanu. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Pleasure.
Put your hands together for Udai, please, ladies and gentlemen. So we're going to be discussing I suppose, a wide variety of topics. But before we get started, or before we get into the topic of Rakuten Symphony, I know you're very keen to talk about Rakuten as a whole, your perceptions of the group, and perhaps where the telecom story fits into the group in general.
No, I think that's a great starting point. 2.5 decades in the classic telecom industry. Coming to Rakuten was, to me, really a breath of fresh air, right? So, one, it's a technology company at its core. They've started in '97, disrupting multiple different industries, leveraging technology. And when I say that, the way they do it is really kind of, if you look at any industry, majority of them, as their capability continues to increase, their costs tend to increase. The way Rakuten comes about it is with technology, where they're able to continue to add growth while capping off the cost structures. And when we talk about that, the real secret sauce of how they do it is based on kind of what we think about as the platform concepts. And Mickey talks about this all the time, and this is very fundamental in terms of how Rakuten looks at their business. And it comes down to how you start to look at your members. Even coming from the outside in, as a telecom operator, you're typically thinking subscribers, subscriptions. It's a very transactional relationship. Mickey talks about them as members. That's a very big difference, because you are now talking about a lifetime value of your members. You're not talking just about a subscription from a subscriber. So the way Mickey thinks about how he creates value is really the difference between a lifetime value of a member and the cost to acquire them. So when we start to look at these two parameters, there are very fundamental things in terms of how we start to create value between the two of these. One is, of course, brand, and that's very obvious in terms of how Rakuten goes about globally, really kind of bringing about brand recognition. But more importantly, as we start to kind of think about, there's a loyalty set up here. So as we start to add different digital services, Rakuten probably has one of the best loyalty programs, the point systems that we talk about. Then we have the subscriber ID or the member ID, where we have the DNA of each of our members, all of the different transactions that they do within our ecosystem. And then now you really supercharge that with data. You can see how you can continue to kind of increase the lifetime value of your members, because you know exactly where, what, and how your member behaves. And you know then what type of services they're going to be interested in. And then you encourage them to use the services, so you can then have a loyalty program that brings all of it together. So when you combine these, this is really the power of Rakuten. It really doesn't matter what industry, what business we get into. That is the secret sauce of how Rakuten has consistently been successful, disrupting multiple different industries. And to me, that's been really the learning. When we said, what is the Rakuten difference? It's pulls apart from how any other operator thinks about their business. And I've had now the pleasure of coming from that side of the house, being on the traditional side of the house, to now a real technology company coming into mobility and how they look at things. And all of the conversations we've been having at MWC, everybody, yes, we've got a network. Yes, we've built a network, right? So that's one part of it. What they want to know is, how do I get rest of what Rakuten has? How do I get a piece of that Rakuten ecosystem play where I can really kind of start to monetize my network, right? So we'll talk a little bit about that. But to me, when you ask, right, outside in, coming into Rakuten, what is it that was really unique? To me, that's really where it stands.
Thank you very much. And again, I always think that a bit of background explanation on the Rakuten Group ecosystem is very useful to consumers outside of Japan. I think it's a very unique company. There's a lot of unique business models there, and I think certainly that context is very, very helpful to keep in mind. I think with that, that helps us move on to, or let's say wind the clock back a few years now, to when Rakuten Mobile was first launched.
Yeah.
I suppose the key question that I want to ask you and your perspectives on is, how did we build Rakuten Mobile, and how is that different from traditional approaches in telecom?
Yeah, and that's, to me, also another interesting thing that I see, right? So when when you look at the industry broadly, the way the architecture or system design for a network is dictated, it's dictated by 2 or 3 network equipment providers. They have their architecture, and it doesn't matter who you are, you fit into that architecture. And that's how the industry works in general. Very rarely does anybody get the flexibility to kind of really define their system and their architecture. When you think about somebody that like Rakuten, whose DNA is a technology company, the one thing they own is their system design. That is their USP. So when Rakuten comes into any business, they own the system design. And the first conflict in the industry was there was nothing in the industry that fit the Rakuten system design, back to the principles we've talked about of how they think about business. They had all of these different network equipment providers. They had their architectures, their designs, and that's how networks are built. And to me, one of the bravest moves that Mickey and team did coming into mobile was continuing to kind of stick with that DNA of owning their system design and finding technology that fits into the system design as opposed to the other way around. And when they started to kind of really build this network, the choices to them started to kind of open up, but it had to be working with new age technologies. So they started really working with these companies that were coming up with newer technologies at that point. Now we're talking 2017, 2018, very early days of Open RAN. But one of the most mature companies that was already doing it, being at this for years, was Altiostar. So they brought Altiostar in from an Open RAN perspective. Then they needed a cloud flavor. And to me, it's a really brave move to kind of look at technology and make a technology choice based on more of the mindset of the company you want to work with. So when we looked at Robin, it was more about we did have other options in cloud, but we had to find a company that was going to work with us, had the flexibility and the dedication to kind of really bring the technology that we want to bear. And that was the choice for the cloud. And similarly, from an OSS perspective and all of the tooling and automation, that's a very critical part of how we wanted to drive differentiation, is how we actually operate this network and the level of automation we wanted to bring to this network, not just from building a network, but from also operating and running the network. So those were really the technology choices that we had to make. And if you really think about back to the question of what is that system design, what is it that Rakuten really looks at that was very different and unique? One, they believe in simplification. If you look at then the technology choice we made, we had the choice to really simplify this to the absolute must-haves within the architecture. If you look at a classic NEP architecture, there's going to be tons of things you probably don't need, you're still paying for. Right? So when we start to talk about how do you fundamentally think about system design, think about simplification. Think about duplication. Think about how much duplication there is within a classic network. That was another choice. That was a system design choice that you make, that you're going to be eliminating all of that duplication. 3 is programmability. There is no question for a technology company to have aspects that are closed off. Every aspect, every piece of that network needs to be programmable. And the reason why you need that is when you have that, you relentlessly automate. You can automate every aspect of what you need if you have these aspects of system design in place. So those are the 4 fundamental aspects when we talk about what is it that's near and dear to Rakuten, their system design. These are the fundamental components. And then you start to look at the technology choices they made with Altiostar, with Robin, with Inoi, with bringing this company in. They all kind of fit into this system design mold, right? So that's kind of really where I think they were unique, brave in building a network when they started. And that to me is really kind of how their technology choices came to bear.
Thank you very much, Udai. So if we briefly put this into context. So Rakuten Mobile's mobile network was launched in April 2020. Fast forward slightly to August 2021, and comes the launch of Rakuten Symphony. Now, as you've touched upon there, Rakuten Mobile acquired a number of different companies, or Rakuten acquired a number of different companies to develop its technology stack. That is now being exported to mobile network operators across the world in the form of Rakuten Symphony. Can you tell us a bit about how, or your perspective on how that company was formed, how it grew, and where it is today?
Absolutely. And again, the story of Rakuten Symphony starts with Rakuten Mobile. And all of the discussion that we've had so far in terms of the technology choices they made that fit into their system design of how they wanted to build the network, the type of network that they wanted to build, is really what went into the acquisition of all of these companies. And if you look at kind of the journey, I may get the order of these things wrong, but they acquired Altiostar, which was the choice for the radio access network, the software for the CU and the DU. Acquired Robin, which is our edge, our cloud platform, and then a company called Innoeye, which is predominantly all of the tooling and the OSS that goes around operating the network. And we did have a couple of acquisitions more from a low-code, no-code perspective that are more architectural in terms of how we design, build the software stacks. But that's really kind of how Rakuten Symphony came about, is the acquisition of all of these really cutting-edge technologies. If you think about it, they were well ahead of their times when this started, because the architecture and the technology we were envisioning was well ahead of the times. So these are technology companies that had software stacks that were already significantly well ahead of the curve. And that to me is the exciting part, is Rakuten brought these companies in and really fueled the innovation. You take a cutting edge company, you add support, you add scale to it, and now what we're starting to see is really what we'll look at as our Symphony portfolio. So we've now hardened these technologies and started to kind of package this into a portfolio for us to take globally. So we have our cloud platform, which we take both to enterprise as well as telco. The key differentiation there being how efficient and how effective our platform is relative to what you have on the market when it comes to performance. And that's really the key secret sauce in terms of why we went with Robin. And we've had to work with Robin in being able to optimize that experience at the edge. And having done that on a live network, on a hardened network, gives us that cutting edge advantage when it comes to that technology. Then on top of that, we've layered our RAN software. Again, this is probably, when it comes to Open RAN, one of the longest running software cycles. So they started probably, or the first to kind of start off with Open RAN. And I'm proud to say this is really the only deployed, at full scale, deployed Open RAN software, period. You can have a lot of proof of concepts globally. You can have a lot of slideware globally. The thing we do uniquely is that we've actually deployed it. We've got 8.5 million subscribers now running on this network, and nobody can claim that. And the level of learnings you get, the level of hardening you get into the software by that size of deployment is really, to me, what is a unique differentiator to us. And then on top of that, we put our cutting edge software that we use to not only build the network, but to operate the network. And we package that into our OSS portfolio with two key pillars around service fulfillment and then the Rio that we talk about today. All of this infused with a very strong data concept, a data platform, and then AI to kind of really drive the efficiencies.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Udai. I suppose one thing I'm very keen to ask you really is, obviously you work very closely with customers. You have to listen to them, you have to find out what their needs are, and obviously those needs are different from operator to operator. But how are we well positioned to bring in transformation, which is not easy? It takes time, it takes patience. How is Rakuten Symphony positioned to help with that transformation and deliver the right outcomes at the right speed and at a realistic speed, I suppose, as well?
Yeah. And I'll go back to the topic that we started with, right? Rakuten difference. To me, there is no company that has what we bring to the table. We have the ecosystem, and we've had so many conversations just in the last 2 days. All of the operators want to look like Rakuten primarily because of the richness of the ecosystem. The biggest challenge anybody in this industry is going to tell you is about monetization. What do I do? How do I get past just the ARPUs and voice and data? What else can I sell? Nobody can answer that question better than Rakuten. We've built a phenomenal ecosystem. And as Mickey talks about, we're now starting to see the dividends of this, right? We bring mobility to a rich ecosystem. You all of a sudden start to see what that captive consumer experience looks like and how much more of the services get consumed within the ecosystem. So mobility and an ecosystem is really that perfect nirvana spot for all of the operators. So we talk about that. So when we talk about what do we bring to the table, we can talk about ecosystem, we can talk about how to monetize, we can talk about platform play, what we can do to really kind of support them on their monetization side of things. Then we're an operator ourselves. So it's not just us building technology, sitting in rooms and on slide decks. We actually use our own technology. So we know the ins and outs of what works, what does not work, what does the operator really need when it comes to a lot of the technologies, what are the challenges in a real deployment. So we're our own operator, we are our own live test bed. So this is a huge advantage. And then we're talking about the cutting edge technologies we can take globally, right? So when you start to put those three parts together, which is really the pillars of our strategy as well, there is nothing that comes close to what Rakuten brings.
Absolutely. I think just a quick, I suppose, semi-personal question from your perspective on what you see ahead in the near future. You're approaching a year now as Chief Revenue Officer of Rakuten Symphony. What are you most excited about for the rest of this year? Obviously, we've recently announced various deals across the Open RAN. There's the real Open RAN licensing, some stuff in cloud. But what really are you looking forward to for the rest of 2025?
I think I'm starting to see a lot more engagement from an Open RAN perspective because now you're starting to see the big tier ones move. It's starting to build a level of confidence in terms of the technology as well. So I think that's really a great development for us. I think there are some tailwinds for us in the industry in general in terms of what's happening. There are some serious challenges for some of our competitors. There's a change in strategic directions for some of our competitors, all of which really play well towards what we want to accomplish in the market. So to me, the rest of this year is for us to be in front of our customers, ensuring that they really understand what and how we do this, because that's been, I think, a bit of a challenge for us is really getting out. We've spent a lot of time building our network, a lot of time hardening our software. This, I think, is the year where we really start to kind of get that story out. It's resonating. It doesn't matter where the customer is. I've had the opportunity over the last 8 months to kind of talk to customers across the globe. They love our story. And there's an absolute traction in the market for all parts of our technology. Every operator is going to have a different starting point, and that's okay with us. And we want to really partner with, with operators across the globe and really drive the transformation that's happening in the industry. To me, that's the most exciting part of what I look forward to here.
Absolutely excellent. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Udai Kanukolanu, Chief Revenue Officer of Rakuten Symphony. Thank you very much, Udai. Pleasure. Thank you.